So the next question that we have on here are, and it's something that you were mentioning before. Could you explain to us what exactly are supervisions? Because some people might have heard them as tutorials as well, which they're more commonly known at Oxford.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a bit of jargon stuff going on here. So um, the small group teaching that we refer to as supervisions at Cambridge is normally called tutorials at Oxford, but it's basically the same thing. Um, and yeah, it's about an hour-long session where students are able to discuss a particular topic or a set of problems on the science side, whatever it may be, in real detail with usually someone who's a kind of world-leading expert in that field, someone who publishes academic journal articles and speaks at conferences and maybe writes books about those kind of topics. So that's who's doing the teaching. So yeah, it's a really intense form of teaching that enables the students who come here to make really quick progress in understanding a range of issues relating to the subject that they're studying. For most people, they'll have either one or two supervisions a week. Occasionally, for some subjects, it might be three, but that's really quite unusual. It's normally one or two. And then, as I said earlier, really, that they may also, in a typical week, have a class or a seminar, possibly some lab-based work on the science side, and there will almost certainly be some lectures as well. So the supervisions form part of that whole kind of package.
Nice. And supervision is something that's quite, from what I know, specific to Oxford and Cambridge compared to other universities.
Yeah, there's a couple of other universities that have a similar system, but the majority of UK universities don't offer supervisions or tutorials in that kind of way.
In that, most universities, the classes won't be one teacher to two students or one-to-one. They could be in bigger groups.
Exactly. What makes supervision so distinctive is the sort of student-teacher ratio. Because even if you're in a group with sort of 10 other people, which is quite a small group, it's really difficult for you to make rapid progress. It may well be that, in that group of 10 students, that there's one or two or three who do a lot of the talking. And it might be difficult for you to say, I don't really understand this. Can you explain it to me again in more detail? Whereas if you're in a group of two, there's lots of opportunity usually for you to ask for something to be explained or for you to demonstrate that you understand the topic really, really well. So yeah, it's that ratio of sort of two students to one teacher or one supervisor that I think makes it such a powerful form of teaching.
And from your experience of being a supervisor, what benefits do you think you've seen how the supervision system has worked for students in that kind of small group teaching?
I think in all sorts of ways. I mean, probably the most I suppose the most common thing that I see is that students really become more confident talking about their subject. I mean, for understandable reasons, when the students are new, when they're in their first year, and especially if it's the first few weeks of their very first term, they can sometimes be a little bit nervous in the supervisions. They don't really know what to expect. They obviously want to try and do their best, but they don't quite know what that means in a supervision because they haven't had supervisions at school. But then as the weeks pass and they fall into that pattern and they relax and they become used to it, they become much less anxious on the whole, I would say, talking about complex and difficult ideas or theories or interpretations or approaches, whatever it is. And I think that's an invaluable skill. Having confidence in one's own views. And I don't mean, arrogance. I mean having the confidence to sort of present one's view, but then also having the humility to consider other perspectives. I think those are the kinds of techniques that people develop in the supervision system. And I think those are really, really helpful. It can also teach people how to function in a discussion situation. So again, in most supervisions, there'd be, as we've said, 2 other students and one supervisor sort of leading the discussion. But being able to respond on the spur of the moment to things that other people are saying in a small group like that, to form an opinion about someone's perhaps very different view of an issue that you're considering. These again are just really, really useful skills, and whatever the students go on to do in their later lives, whether they stay in academia, whether they go into some sort of company or something, or whether they go into law, whatever it may be, these are just really, really valuable skills that future employers will be looking for.
Nice. So I imagine a lot of people watching, they're going to be quite curious of how supervisions differ between different subjects. So could you, I don't know, give us an example of what an engineering supervision might look like compared to a supervision for philosophy or English?
Yeah, so to start with the latter case, I guess. So for a subject like English, typically for a supervision, the students will be given some texts to read. They'll be told you have to read these primary texts and then these secondary texts. The secondary text will be some literary criticism about the primary text usually. And they'll probably be given an essay question that they then have to answer. And so during the week before the supervision, they'll do the reading, and then they'll write an essay in response to the question. These days, many supervisors ask to be sent the essay in advance of the supervision. Some of them may even mark it and give it back before the supervision takes place, if there's time to do that. And then during the supervision, the work that the students have done will be discussed in detail. And if there's something that they haven't understood, or something that they've maybe understood but in a slightly simplistic way, and their understanding of it could be more complex and more nuanced, that's the kind of thing that will get discussed in the supervision. And then the supervisor might recommend a couple of additional things that the students could read if they're really interested in this topic, so in advance of the exams, which may be, at that point, a few months away. They could make a note of that and then plan to read those things so that if they write about the same topic in the exam, they'll write about it much more convincingly. So that would be a typical kind of, arts and humanities style
And just on that,
supervision.
and you wouldn't be able to do that if there's a group of 15 people.
No.
In an hour, even 2 hours.
No, absolutely not. Or if you did, it would be so superficial that it wouldn't be worthwhile. Every student would get literally sort of 2 minutes feedback, and then you've kind of run out of time. And whereas with just 2 students, an hour is a good period of time. If the supervisions lasted 5 hours, I think everyone would be exhausted. So I think an hour. Sometimes it doesn't feel like quite enough. Sometimes if you get into a really interesting discussion, you sort of think, oh, it's a shame we can't go on for another, half an hour or something. But I think an hour is normally a good period of time. Everyone can focus and concentrate, and hopefully everyone leaves feeling as if they've learnt something, as if they've discovered something.
But on that, before we go on to the STEM subject supervisions, what I like about Cambridge is that, so even if a supervision felt cut short, or you had questions for your tutor in between supervisions, there's a culture in Cambridge where it's very encouraging for students to ask those questions through email to the academics.
Yeah, absolutely, and sometimes that can be worth doing, especially if while the student is preparing the work in advance of the supervision, if they just want to check that they've done something correctly, that they've understood something correctly, it's far better to check it just in a short email, and then as a supervisor I can reply saying, yeah, that's fine, that's exactly what you should be doing, rather than not check and then prepare the work in a way that's maybe not quite right for the supervision, because then it means that the student's less likely to benefit from that hour discussion. If they've done something that's not quite what you wanted them to do, then it's fine. You can sometimes still talk about it, but it's not as useful. Just checking a few little details, just so then they're in a position to produce the work with real confidence, that's almost always beneficial.
Yeah, and I think you've touched on something that is quite a big thing in Cambridge that viewers might not know about, is that there really is a culture amongst the students and trying to get the most out of the supervision. You really not only want to it's not just about getting the work done, but you want like the more understanding you can do behind the scenes before the supervision, and the more prepared you can be, the more you can get out of the supervision using that 1 hour to, you might go through the content and realize, okay, there's these 10 specific things I know that I don't know, and then when I have the world leading expert in front of me, I can ask them, like, go one after the other. Whereas and this is inevitable, like no one's going to be on top of it every single week.
No.
But those supervisions where you haven't been able to do as much as you would like to, naturally you're going to have to spend more of the time going through the groundwork, the more basic stuff, and less on the ironing out the fine tuning. But I mean that's also a process that each student kind of gets their grip with as they go along the process.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think it's interesting to contrast the supervisions with things like the lectures that we were talking about earlier, because, as I guess I said, I mean, lectures are a really good way of communicating a lot of information to a large number of people quite quickly. I would say that, lectures tends to be a format where the students acquire quite a lot of knowledge. The supervisions are the main format where they acquire understanding. Right. Yeah. So very often, stuff that you've learnt in a lecture, but learnt in quite a superficial way, maybe, you've learnt it, you've got the knowledge that this theory exists, or that this approach is a influential one. It's in the supervision that you'd then discuss that in more detail, and you'd really get to a point where you fully understand why that is so important, or you fully understand how to apply this particular approach. And it's hard to get to that point in the lecture just because it's pitched at kind of everyone who's there. And as we said, it could be 100 people. Whereas in a supervision, if you personally do not understand the importance of this part of the theory that's being considered, you can ask and that can be explained to you. And so then you sort of have a eureka moment. You're like, I get it now. I see why you have to do it that way. That's what you're more likely to get from a supervision. I'm not saying it's impossible to get that in a lecture. It does sometimes happen, but I think in my experience anyway, it happens more often in supervisions than lectures.
Yeah, I mean, I know some people really like lectures and they really learn a lot from listening to someone speak in front of a group. But I remember I personally didn't like them too much. I did attend my lectures, but I relied on the supervisions tutorials to get most of my learning done. And I think one of the great things about Cambridge is that students have a choice.
Absolutely.
If you choose, if you know that your independent study and your supervisions will be enough for you to get a lot of your understanding. You can make that choice, whereas universities that don't have supervisions, if your lecturer isn't great, there's not really, you're going to have to try to make that work.
Yeah, and I think it's actually one of the reasons why at Cambridge we offer these various different forms of teaching that we've discussed, in this podcast, because we know that different people study in different ways and different people learn in different ways, and as the student community has just become so diverse here, especially in the last sort of 10 to 15 years. It can't be the case in terms of teaching that one size fits all. That's just not the case. And so having different forms of teaching, and some people will really benefit from one and maybe a bit less from another, but they've still got the opportunity to experience it, whereas another person might benefit from that second type a lot and less so from the first type. We all learn in different ways and different things work for us. So I think having that diversity is important. And just to complete my answer to your question earlier, so everything we've said about supervisions, there is also true on the STEM side, for science subjects as well. Obviously, you don't normally get asked to write essays, if you're studying something like engineering or natural sciences, physical or something like that. But you may be given a set of physics problems, things to sort of work through. You may during the week arrive at the right answer, as it were, for some of them, but not all of them. And then in the supervision, particularly if you've struggled with something, and if there's something you just haven't managed to sort of to cope with, you haven't managed to sort of find a way to the answer. That can provide a sort of focus for the discussion there, and the person doing the teaching can help you understand what it is you've misunderstood, so that you can then reach a point of getting to the right answer with confidence.
So, on supervisions there and tutorials, there's some myths that I guess supervisions are apparently just an opportunity for students to blag for an hour and I guess pretend to know what they're talking about. Is that the case, or and yet what happens to students if they try to pretend to know to claim to know more than they do, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. Yeah, and it's a good thing to ask about, really. In my experience, I would say supervisions are probably the hardest place to try and blag your way through something that you don't really understand, simply because you're talking to someone who's a world-leading expert in that field. And therefore, if you're kind of like bluffing and blagging and pretending stuff, well, you tell me, do you think they'll notice that? Or do you think they won't notice that? And of course, it's kind of fine. I mean, all students from time to time end up in situations where they have forgotten something, or they don't know something, and because they want to sort of give a good impression, they might sort of pretend that they know it. But yeah, in a supervision situation, that just becomes obvious. And of course, it becomes obvious more quickly, I would say, for some subjects than others. If you're in a maths supervision, it's kind of hard to blag your way through through maths. Like you sort of have to just apply the rules, as it were, correctly. And if you're not doing that, and if you don't really know what it is you're supposed to be doing, I would say after probably about a minute, it becomes obvious. For other subjects that are a bit more discussion based, I'm thinking of things like philosophy, I'm thinking of things like possibly history, English. It might take a little bit longer for the supervisor to work out that the student hasn't really maybe given the time to this topic and doesn't really understand it. So rather than a few seconds, it might take a couple of minutes, but it will become apparent. And as I say, that's kind of fine. Like students aren't punished, for not understanding things, or maybe pretending that they understand more than they do. That's what learning's all about, figuring those sorts of things out. But yeah, this idea that supervisions are just a sort of really useful training ground for blaggers. In my experience, that's just not the case at all. I don't really know where you need to go to train to become a really good blagger, but I wouldn't recommend a supervision at Cambridge. I think it's the worst place.
Cambridge is not the place for that.
No.
So from what you're saying, it really sounds like that the supervisor has the power to really stop anyone from blagging and pretending to know a lot more than they do during a supervision.
Absolutely, yeah, because the supervisor will be a world-leading expert in that field, and so if someone's trying to assert something or claim something that is just incorrect or is just very simplistic or whatever, it's the supervisor's job to sort of draw that to the student's attention. And again, it's not done in an aggressive, confrontational way. It's often done, I guess, in a sort of slightly playful way, pointing out maybe weaknesses in whatever it is the student's saying, to sort of gradually make them aware of the fact that they need to think more carefully about the subject they're discussing before they give their opinions with such confidence. But yeah, the supervisor is fully able to reveal to the student that the blagging has been identified, and
Yeah.
it would be a better learning experience for everyone if the blagging was, seriously diminished.
Yeah. I guess in those situations, some students just want to really get through the question and survive without anyone knowing that they might have not done as much work as they are claiming to, and I think we've shown here that it's just very tough to do that in supervision.
Exactly, and there are certainly some students, who are very, very fluent. They'll speak very, very fluently about things, even if they don't know very much about them. But fluency isn't the same as a deep understanding, and they may sound very knowledgeable and authoritative if you happen not to know very much about that topic. But if you are a world-leading expert in that topic, it will become apparent to you within a few seconds that this is a student just being very fluent, but not demonstrating any great knowledge and understanding. And then the discussion can hopefully be directed by the supervisor so that the student acquires a bit more knowledge and understanding of that topic. And then, maybe they'll speak about it less fluently, but with greater insight, and that's really progress.
Yeah, and if you're not found out during the supervision, you probably will be in the exams.
Oh, absolutely. There's nowhere to hide in the exams.
No. so I know it's not out of the world for someone to ask, is a supervision a debate where you're debating with either the supervisor or your fellow student who's in your supervision? From what you're saying, that's not the case?
I could imagine some supervision situations where it may become something a bit more like a debate. I mean, as a supervisor, it's not uncommon to play devil's advocate a little bit.
Yeah.
So if a student is talking about a subject and they're talking about it perfectly well and they've got good understanding of it, and you're sort of broadly in agreement with what they're saying about it, that doesn't stop you as a supervisor asking them questions from the other perspective and getting them to reflect upon what they're seeing and maybe identify weaknesses in the position they're outlining or the theory they're discussing. That's not strictly a debate, I guess, but it is often the role of the supervisor to put contrary opinions, just so that students are forced to think more deeply about the ideas that they're presenting in a supervision. Because again, it's often only when we're sort of challenged, and I don't mean aggressively, I just mean in a friendly, sympathetic way, when we're sort of challenged to justify our particular view of an issue. It's only then really that we start thinking about it in more detail, because you think, okay, so why is it that I actually believe that to be the case? And then you start drilling down into the detail of it a little bit more. So that might feel at times a bit like a debate, but it's not a sort of artificial kind of fake thing.
Yeah.
It is usually just a genuine learning opportunity, and the supervisor will try and set things up and coordinate things as effectively as possible to ensure that the students learn as much as they possibly can in that hour-long session.
I guess, yeah. So I guess what the kind of debating that I was thinking was when one person is trying to win and trying to show that they're right, whereas a supervision, from what you're saying, doesn't sound like it's like that at all, and really it's a place for those three people to learn together.
Yep.
More so the students.
Absolutely. Yeah, it really is a learning opportunity above everything else, and that's not just the case for the students. Actually, I think very often, if a supervision goes really well, then the person doing the teaching, the supervisor, often comes away having thought more carefully about a subject that they know a lot about already, but maybe they just hadn't considered it in that kind of way. And so, yeah, I mean, I've experienced that myself on numerous occasions. You come away from a supervision thinking, oh, it's really interesting. Okay, so if we follow that through, then it takes us to that place, and that's interesting. So I think, yeah, if everyone prepares appropriately and carefully for it, it can be a really invaluable learning experience for the students and for the supervisor.
And I guess you must have supervised some extremely bright students who've said things that you've never heard before.
Yeah, I've taught lots of students who've said things I've never heard before in all sorts of different ways. And yeah, again, as a supervisor, it's really enjoyable when you start teaching a student, for the first time, and it becomes apparent that you're working with someone who's just really intelligent, really serious-minded, really focused, really wants to learn. That's just such a satisfying experience, for everyone involved, and particularly for the supervisor. And then you just try and make sure that you set things up so that that student is able to make as much progress as possible. I mean, they may already be at a relatively high level, but it's always possible for any of us to improve and get better. What I sometimes say to my students is that when I'm supervising, what I'm really trying to do is make myself as pointless as quickly as possible, right? So what I want to do is not teach them in such a way that they become dependent upon me, so that there's some kind of situation where they're completely intellectually passive before I tell them what they should think about something. I hate that. I think that's terrible. What I want to do is try and teach them how not to need me at all, so that if I weren't there at all, they'd still be thinking critically about what they're saying, and they'd still be probing things really, really insightfully, whether I'm there encouraging them to do it or not. And I think the best supervising takes that form. It's about helping people to become sort of fully independent in their thinking and learning, so that they're not constantly dependent upon a teacher of any kind.
Yeah, that is really interesting. I guess like the dream would be when students become very secure and independent and independent learners, as you were saying, but in that time of the supervision with yourself, engaging with you not in a way where they're dependent on their supervisor, but recognise their supervisor's expertise.
Sure.
and uses that to the maximum way that they can benefit from, whilst not, sacrificing any of part of their identity, but academic beliefs that they have, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I say, I think when it works well, that's the kind of position one arrives at, and I think the students enjoy that. I think the supervisors enjoy that, and it makes you think, this is the point to what we're doing here. This is why we're all here trying to do these things.
Yeah, it reminds me of that it's like a Japanese proverb of I've really put my foot in it now. It's don't give someone a fish, but teach them how to fish.
Right, because it's a much longer term solution to the problem.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. You're trying to give them that sort of independence so that they don't need you to provide them with fish in that case.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I really hope that proverb is from Japan.
We'll find out. We'll Google it afterwards. And what about the vegetarians? What are you giving? What are you giving them?
That's the real meaning of the proverb. Wow. Yeah. I've never really thought about the fact that I don't actually eat fish. I've used that proverb many times.
Don't just give someone a carrot.
God. So the last question that we have on here is, so for Cambridge Supervisions, how do they help students prepare for life after Cambridge, whether that's academic or non-academic?
Yeah, I think it's really just a combination of many of the things we've discussed already. I mean, this emphasis we've had on learning how to be kind of independent thinkers and learners, that's to use that sort of crude expression, it's a transferable skill, right? I mean, that's going to be really helpful whatever you go on to do in your sort of adult life. And sure, if you stay in academia, it's particularly helpful, but if you go into industry, it's helpful. If you go into journalism, it's helpful. I mean, when students benefit from the supervision system, they become really good at reading a lot of material quite rapidly, understanding it quite quickly, and then being able to explain it very coherently. And again, many jobs require those kinds of skills. So the students here should never think that they're only learning skills that will benefit them if they stay in academia and do a PhD and then become a lecturer or something. They're learning skills that future employers will see as being highly desirable across a wide range of different areas. Again, I think that's one of the long-term benefits of the supervision system that continues to be a benefit long after students have graduated and they've stopped having supervisions. They still benefit from the supervisions that they did have while they were students here.
I think one thing that we haven't mentioned is that I think a lot of the students, including myself, when I was a student, find supervisions a lot of fun. There's nothing really quite like it. Both the adrenaline before supervision, as well as the opportunity to talk with a world-leading expert and your peers around a topic week by week. And yes, like university is a lot more independent than school, but what's really nice about supervision is that you always feel in touch with your teacher. You're not completely left to your own devices. You're regularly seeing them almost one-to-one per week, and it's one of those things that I think every graduate would say when they look back on their time at university. Those supervisions that they had week after week are one of the things that they like reminisce of amongst all of the other things of their lives at Cambridge.
No, I think that's right. And emphasising the fun aspect of it is important because we haven't really mentioned that yet. And yet it is. You're quite right. It's a really important part of it. And again, not just for the students, for the supervisors as well. Because often, when you're a supervisor, that you've got to teach, one group or two groups or maybe three groups on a given afternoon, one after another. You might have been lecturing that morning. It might be getting towards the end of term and frankly, you're just exhausted. And so in advance of the supervision, you might think, I could really do without this today. Like, I'm not sure I've got the energy for this. But let's see how it goes. And then more often than not, at the end of the supervision, you feel energized, you feel engaged, you've had a really enjoyable hour discussing something with students who are really keen to learn. And so you feel much better about yourself and about the world at the end of the supervision than you did before it. I think, the sort of enjoyable nature of it is there for everyone involved, not just the students, but hopefully the students find it enjoyable as well. They tell me they do, so I guess I have to believe them.